Why isn't it saying? Oh, here we go. Perfect. Okay.
It's asking me if I want to leave the meeting.
Yeah, me too.
So you're being
And,
live streamed. Are you sure you want this?
all right.
Actually,
Okay. Here we go. Hello, Roy Sprung. How you doing?
terrific, man. Thank God. I'm really, really good. We should tell, by the way, all of our listeners that we got to see each other in person some time ago, and that was pretty awesome. You're being
That's
live
right.
streamed. Are you sure?
We did. That is true. We got to see each other last week. I went to Miami for the day to lead an NCSY Sheck Hillel joint. There was other high schools there as well. There were like 7 different high schools represented. Hillel had the greatest contingent. They had 45 students from Hillel that came out. It was 70 teenagers from South Florida who went on a learning and lobbying mission throughout South Florida. So he started off at the Israeli consulate, and then Avi Fryer and the wonderful staff at the Young Israel of Hollywood was nice enough to open their doors and let us use it as a base. And we had Josh Donner from APAC South Florida region, speak to the students. Then we had representatives from Congressman Deutsch and Senator Scott's office, Republican,
Wow.
Democrat, House member and Senate member, and so both bipartisan and bicameral. And then we had the last speaker was a debate between myself playing a Palestinian and or a Palestinian activist, and Joe Zlooney playing himself a pro-Israel activist, and it was
Wow.
quite the day, quite the day.
That's nice. And I wish I would have been able to go. I originally intended to go, and then instead we had me doing other kinds of meetings, which were equally fun, but not as Israel related. I'm curious, do you ever do any work with J Street or only with APAC?
I speak to J Street. I speak to. I have an op-ed about this week in the Jewish press.
Oh,
That's why
really?
you're asking. Yeah,
No,
but
it might come as a shock to you. I didn't know what op-ed you were penning most recently.
so I have a weekly column in the Jewish press, and that is the topic of my column this week. But let's jump into the topic today because we have a big crowd
Yalla,
watching.
let's do it. Let's do it.
Let's
Amen. You got that, guys? You see that religious signaling? Yes, sir.
Okay, so the topic that we are discussing is this week is a question. The question is, can you be a Zionist outside of Israel? Or does loving the land and the nation require living in it and working for it from within it?
Wow.
That's the question that we have. So yeah, it's a heated topic. It's a very heated topic because a lot of, I gotta tell you, I'll start off this way, and then I want you to take over, please. A lot of Israelis feel completely disconnected from diaspora Jewry because they view diaspora Jewry as you've chosen America and we're here in Israel. That is something that I hear all the time. And diaspora Jews that feel very insulted when their feelings and their thoughts aren't taken into consideration by Israelis.
Isn't that funny? Like I have this theory that you're only insulted when it's true, but I could be wrong about that.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like if someone was to, we'll say, accuse me, yeah, if someone was to accuse me of not loving the land of Israel because I don't live there, I promise you I'll sleep very, very well at night, because the way that I feel about the land of Israel is a personal feeling. It's in my heart, it's in my soul, it's in my mind. I pray for it avidly. Every single time that I daven to Hashem, and this is like getting way personal and way religious, but whatever, we're in it, so I'm gonna just keep going, because in for a penny, in for a pound. So in Sim Shalom, like, to me, in Sim Shalom, it's not only about the peace of I, Shlomo Michael Sprung, the individual, and the peace of my family and the greater family, etc. But every single time that I say Sim Shalom or Shalom Rav, I think about the land of Israel, and I think about the soldiers. I think about our boys, and that God should bless them with peace, and that God should give them Atar Nitzachon. So for someone else to tell me what it is that I feel, it's not even like, it's not accusatory, it's just comical. But on a real personal level, well, that's a real question. You say, okay, Sprung, but if you love Israel so much, like you claim to, then why don't you live there? That's a great question. It's a great question why I don't live there. It's not the same thing as saying, do I think that diaspora Jews cannot work towards the betterment, the strengthening of the state of Israel and the people of Israel? I think that's obviously patently true. Clearly we can. Clearly we can. And not only that, I wish that the state of Israel needs needs a powerful, strong, ardent, loving voice in the diaspora in all of these countries to pipe up and stand up for our people and for our state. 100%, I think that's true. Now, does that mean that I give the same Mesirat Nefesh, the same? How would you translate Mesirat Nefesh? Dedication? Not really.
Sacrifice.
Sacrifice.
Is sacrifice. Yeah.
Good.
Sacrifice.
Good. So, do I sacrifice for the state of Israel like my friend Rabbi Pilichowski, the rational settler? I do not, because I live in beautiful Miami, Florida, and I don't have to have a security fence around my house, and I don't have to worry.
For the record, I don't have one around my house.
Yet, I hear Mrs. Pilichowski is pushing to extend the security fence. The point is that people who live in this country are absolved of certain hardships that the people who live in Israel have to pay. For example, 55% income tax and a 17% VAT, and the fact that their children are being drafted into a military service, a mandatory military service. Like, all of these things are prices that you pay that I do not. And for me to not acknowledge that would be, I think, lying to myself. You clearly pay those prices and I do not. And I applaud you for it. And I love you for it. And I thank you for it. I don't think that means that I'm not contributing to our people in any way, but I certainly do think you can make the case that you contribute on a much more visceral level than I do. I think you do.
So I think I take it all, but let me try to narrow the question a little here. The question is really about the definition of a Zionist, right? That was the real question, right? So you brought up a lot of very, very, I think like each of your sentences in that statement could be dissected and examined. But so I think let's focus at least at the start on the question of, can you be a Zionist, right? So and live outside of Israel.
So when all of the original Zionists had that in common, what do all of the original Zionists have in common? They weren't Israeli, right? Herzl was Viennese and Weizmann was British, and.
Weizmann,
but you could,
just for the record, Weizmann is Russian, but yeah.
I thought he lived in the United Kingdom.
He moved to England for a little bit, but he did take on, at a certain point, he did take British citizenship, but technically Russian.
Fair. I mean, well, he's the reason that Britain was able to fight in World War I, because he figured out a way to create acetone.
Right.
Yeah.
I say for England, yes. It doesn't matter.
Fair enough. Okay, Weizmann is Weizmann that.
I happen to be studying Weizmann right now, so you hit a landmine.
This is what happens when two rabbis get in a room. They can't even agree on the. No, he wasn't Russian. So he wasn't Russian. He was Ukrainian. So
no, he was Russian.
When we talk about Zionism as the way that I define it, because in order to say can you be Zionist now, we have to define the term, and I've defined it numerous times on the show that Zionism is the belief that Jews should have the ability to self-determine in the state of Israel. That's what Zionism means to me. Self-determination in the state of Israel.
Well, also, you can say in the state of Israel, because let me ask you this question. Could the state of Israel be, and again, I've been studying this like way too much, but can the state of Israel be outside the land of Israel?
Like Uganda. Could it be in Uganda because that's what Herzl wanted?
Or Argentina.
Right. So to me, personally, no, I don't believe so.
I just said because you're clarifying your definition. So
yeah, I'm saying to me,
I wanted to clarify your definition.
Yeah, to me, Zionism is the right of Jews to self-determine in the land of Israel. That's what it means to me. And people, and people can, we can quibble about the definition and move it this way, move it that way, but that's how I feel about it. So, is it impossible that I can support the rights of Jews to self-determine in the land of Israel from Miami, Florida? Well, anyone who works for the Israeli government knows, and anyone who has a little bit of history knows, that when Israel was facing its wars not so long ago, they would send people to LA and Miami and Chicago and Baltimore and New York City, and people, and this is like, if I cry, I'm sorry, but it's so meaningful to me. Like literally, the state of Israel would send a representative to walk into a shul in New York City and talk about the dire needs that are there. And people would walk up to them, old ladies would walk up to them and take off their gold necklaces and hand it to the person. So do I believe that we can help? Absolutely, we can, and we do, and we must continue to. And it's such a beautiful thing. I remember my grandmother, my Bubby Lily of blessed memory. I never met my grandfather. He died before I was born, my father's father. But my grandmother remarried when I was in high school. to a wonderful man named Bill Michelson of blessed memory. And when I met his rabbi, he introduced me to his rabbi, who was a very old man at the time, by explaining to me that in 1948, in the War of Independence, this rabbi, whose name was Rabbi Shore, was running guns. He was a gun runner. This rabbi was raising money to buy weapons from, I think, Scotland, I don't recall, and have them smuggled into Israel so that the people in the Haganah would be able to defend themselves against the invading armies. So do I think that Jews in the diaspora can help the Jews be indigenous and self-determine the land of Israel? Emphatically, yes.
All right. So again, no one's asking, can you help? Unless you're
I thought that's what you were asking.
No, I'm asking, are you a Zionist? Right. And as you said, that a Zionist is someone who believes that the Jewish people should be able to self-determine in Israel. Yeah. So that's the first question. So are you a Zionist? If you're now, like, it's the idea that I'll push back a little here. You say that all early Zionists lived outside of the land of Israel, right? So that's right. But as soon as there was a state of Israel, almost all of them, not all, but almost all of the original Zionists ended up in Israel, right? That's so before there was a state of Israel, saying that well, the Zionists all came from outside of Israel, but yes, but that's because they were creating a movement.
That's a good point. You're right.
Yeah, that's my whole point there. I don't have anything else to say.
Yeah. I agree with it.
Right. So now comes the question: can a Zionist today, post the creation of the state of Israel, where we're not working to create a state anymore, right? Where we have other challenges that we're working on. The Zionist dream is still alive and grows every single day, right? It goes for
But isn't Zionism an opinion?
I don't know what you mean by that.
Zionism,
an opinion or a position, or
it's an ism. It's a belief. It's a way that people feel about something. Zionism is the way that I feel about an idea. It's not a checklist of things that I have to do. It's a belief that I hold. So if I believe,
okay. So Zionism. So you're saying Zionism is where you're saying that I maintain, right? My I don't know if the feeling is the right word or opinion, but I maintain that Jews should have the right to self-determine in the land of Israel, right? Their land, right? That's what you're. That's
my definition of Zionism. That's my definition. Again, people can argue.
Okay. So a Zionist doesn't really have to do anything. It's just a system of, it's an axiom that they hold by.
It's a belief. That's it. You can be a Zionist. You could be a Zionist Eskimo. You don't have to be Jewish. You don't have to be a Democrat or a Republican. If you believe that Jews,
could a communist like own a department store in America? Like going exactly like I'm gonna say exactly.
Yeah, it depends how militant. Depends how militant the communist is. So communism is a financial system, if I understand it correctly, because it doesn't only have to be limited to that. It could be a lot more than that, but it's at base, it's a financial system. So if I want to live and participate in a particular financial system in this country where I live, and I also want to have land holdings in a different country, I don't know that would be oxymoronic, or maybe I could, but certainly if I want to be a communist in Russia and I own department stores in Russia, I could see how that might be a mutually exclusive reality.
Right. So okay. So that's my question is, could you really believe that? Well, let me ask you this question: do you maintain that Zionism, like that the definition of Zionism requires Jews to live in Israel? Or just that Jews should have the right to live in Israel?
It's a right.
Okay.
To me, it's a right. If you don't want to exercise your rights, you don't have to. That's up to you. But I believe that you should have the right. I believe that people should have the right to vote. I don't think you should be obligated to vote. I think it's a good value. I vote, but I won't make you vote.
So Australia, right, requires you to vote, right? You get fined.
It's an infringement upon my liberty.
Right. So perfectly legitimate opinion to say that it's that it's an infringement on your liberty. I guess the real question that I'm grappling with is if you can have a belief that the Jewish people should have a state, and then not act on that belief in your own personal life,
Mm-hmm.
But again, you according to your definition of Zionism, there's no contradiction whatsoever.
None.
I right, you believe that the Jews should have a state. Doesn't mean that that every Jew must be in that state.
Correct. Now,
Yeah.
if you wanted to get personal about it, my feelings towards the state of Israel really, it's not about the state of Israel, it's about Israel. And it predates the state by a very, very long time.
Are you talking about a nation, the land? What are you
I'm talking about
about?
the land.
Land.
The land, yes, the land of Israel to me is connected to me on a visceral level, on a primal level, on an essential level. It's beautiful to me. And I lived there for a long time. I would love to live there again. And I struggle, me personally, I struggle with the balance between the comforts and the lifestyle that I've built for myself here in Miami, and saying, okay, well, why don't I just pull a Pilichowski? Why don't I get up and take my family and move to the Negev? Why don't I do that? That's a thought that I have often. And I oscillate back and forth between what it is that I'm really supposed to be doing, and do I belong here, and do I belong there? I think those are real questions. Do I at any time or point second guess my support for the Zionist endeavor? I do not. One's a personal question, and one is, like, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Just for the record, I don't live in the Negev, but yeah. Okay, so
I said, you live in Mitzvah Rico. I would say where I would go.
He said Paul Pilichowski
and pick up my Negev. Fair enough.
Right, move to the Negev. So I just want to clarify for everybody. I don't live anywhere near the Negev. Yeah, I do live in a desert. It's just not the Negev.
It's a different desert.
It's a different desert. I live in the world's smallest desert, the Judean desert, and it is a different desert than the Negev. So that's Okay, great. So there's so then my question becomes as follows. Here's a question, because we're grappling over Zionism. Would you be okay with, because you said that you believe firmly in the self-determination of the Jewish people in the land of Israel. Yeah. So let's say we would turn it, and many people take this, it's a political position, but they believe that there should be a one state reality here of all the inhabitants, and turn this country that currently exists, or let's say the government today controls from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean, and turn that land into essentially a government system like America. One vote, one person, everybody that lives in the area gets to be a citizen of that land, and whatever government comes about is that government. So all Jews would have the rights. It would be a constitution. All Jews would have all the rights that they have in the United States of America. There would be no limitations to the rights that Jews have. So they'd be able to self-determine their own future in their land. But it would not be the state of Israel. It would not be a Jewish state.
Once you make it not a Jewish state, you're saying that it's not the right of Jews to self-determine. You're saying it's the right of people who live in a particular geography to self-determine.
Right. So I'm saying but Jews that live there do you have right now in Miami? Do you have the right of self-determination?
Yes.
Okay.
From an American perspective, not from a Jewish perspective.
Okay, I'm saying, but you have the same right of self-determination, right?
I would say move to Brooklyn. It's not the same thing, right? Meaning, correct. If we made Israel into America, then it wouldn't be the right of Jews to self-determine. It's just the right of all people to self-determine, which I believe. I believe that every people should have the right of self-determination in their land, which is to say the Kurds should have the right of self-determination in their land. They don't have the right to self-determination in Canada, but if they become Canadian, they have the Canadian right of self-determination, etc.
So my question is, and I'll ask a classic Talmudic question. In my nafkamina, what's the difference between the Jewish people having the right to self-determine and the Jews as individuals having the right to self-determine in the United States of America?
So we're saying in the US that everyone in the United States who is American has the right to an American self-determination. We're saying that French people have a right to self-determine as the French in France, and the Italians don't get a say in what happens to the French people in France. Now, if a Frenchman moves to Italy and votes in the Italian elections, he votes as a French expat, as an Italian. It's not French self-determination. I believe that the Jews should have the right to self-determine in the land of Israel, which is to say that if I'm an Eskimo, like we used before, an Eskimo should have the right to self-determine in Alaska, not in Israel. In Israel, it is a nation called the Nation of Israel, and they should have the right to self-determine there. And if one of those people, if one of those Israelites decides to up and move to Chicago and become an American and vote as an Israelite expat in Chicago, sababa, more power to him.
Okay. Okay, I hear. Okay, yeah, it comes back to you're right. Your idea of that we talked about last week of the Jews as a people, not as
not a religion. Yeah, this religion business it's a terrible thing. Religion, terrible thing.
Right. Okay, so now like the second part of the question, which I had stated the question as one question, but it really and now I really see it as two. So I'm just going to quote the second half of the question now. Does loving the land and the nation require living in it and working in it working for it from within it? Because now we're not asking the definition of Zionism. We're asking the definition of, and I don't even know where this concept comes from, but a concept of ahavat haaretz, love of the land, right? I don't know of any concept of loving the land. I don't know of any mitzvah of loving the land. I don't know of any philosophical value. I mean, there's
never encountered chiba da'ara in the Talmud.
Chiba da'ara? I don't recognize the phrase.
You have encountered it. You have encountered it.
Okay. I must have. I've learned Gemara, so I had to have. I don't remember it, but I know there's a concept of not going opposite of not being malsh in the land. That's for sure. That's all. Right. That's all.
Yeah. But, careful if you do that.
Right. No, right. So that I know. So I'm not saying but is there a concept of proactively having feelings towards land, and do you have to be in the land to have that?
I'm going to answer your question in typical Jewish fashion. I'm going to say yes and no. First, no, meaning I'm entitled to whatever feelings I happen to feel. So if I love you and I don't do anything for you, you can say, well, if you don't do anything for me, you don't love me. But I either love you or I don't. So if I love you and give you nothing, well, I love you, period. And whether or not I give you is a different issue. That's the first piece. So that's a no. Now here's the yes. The yes is, do I feel because I love you, that therefore I want to help you, and therefore perhaps even I should help you? Yeah, I do. And I think that feeling is so common among not just American Jews, but among diaspora Jews. Like, Jews do missions to Israel so that we can get way overcharged in silly restaurants, and so we can overpay the cab driver, and so we can drop money on stupid trinkets in the street, and so we can support the Israeli economy. We want to go there and stay in the hotels. We want to eat the pizza, and it's bad pizza. It doesn't matter. The sauce is good, but if you need sauce for the pizza, it's bad pizza, tangentially. So we want to do that. Like, on my table, we have Israeli products on the table. Now, is it true because my wife is Israeli and she likes the kutzat yavna pickles, and therefore, yes, it's true, but it's more than that. It's more than that. I love when I can put something on my table that came from the land of Israel. I love that I can support the people there. I do, because I like it. I don't think that I'm obligated to, or I would obligate someone else to, but I think it's such a beautiful opportunity that I get to do this. I can go to the kosher store on 41st Street, there are 5, and all of them, every single one of them is stocked with so many products, with wines and with olives and with sauces and with like so many things. And it's like such an opportunity and a gift that I can buy those things. So I'm happy to pay more for them. Right. So you're saying you can, that's a method of loving Israel from without. It's a blessing. Like my great grandfather couldn't buy Israeli pickles if he wanted to. Right. But I can. Right. Well, I'm not asking the question of if it's a blessing or not. I'm asking, right? I'm just looking at the question again. You're saying, right, is it possible to love the land without giving to it? So I think yes, it is, but it doesn't mean without giving to it, without being in it. Why wouldn't you be able to love something without being there? I don't need to be with you to love you. I think the counter argument would be that the definition of loving the land is if you really love the land and you had the opportunity to be in the land, then you'd be in the land. So I don't understand that. Meaning, I get where it's coming from, By saying, well, if you love me and you don't live next door to me, then you don't love me. No, maybe I love you and there are reasons why I live across the street and not next door. So, well, you have the opportunity to live in the land of Israel. So if you don't live there, you obviously don't love it. No, there's 11d6 other reasons why perhaps I don't live there. There could be social reasons, there could be economic reasons, there could be family reasons, right? There's so many reasons. So I think that to say that is a little silly to think that about people. Now, again, as I mentioned before, I do personally struggle. I do struggle with this thought. Like, hey man, maybe I really should get up and go. I do think that. And every time I'm there, I love it. I'm going in December. I'm so excited. Like, thank God. But it's not like when I sit here thinking to myself, well, if I live here, then I really don't love Eretz Yisrael. Like, that's not true. I don't feel that way.
I hear that. I definitely hear. Okay, so let me ask you this question then. So what's the difference between, and is there a difference between a Zionist and connecting both things, between a Zionist and a lover of Israel, who is in the land versus one who's not in the land?
There's a difference between a Zionist and a lover of Israel, number one. Number two,
right.
There's that. Right. So there's both. There's that, and then also there's a difference between a Zionist in and a Zionist out, and a lover of Israel in and a lover of Israel out. So it's yes and yes.
So what are those? What are the differences there?
Okay. So Zionism is a political feeling. So there are many Jews around the world who believe that Israel is holy and all the Jews should live there, but there should not be a political system that's Jewish. They want to live under, I don't know, a Turkish flag. So they could love the state, they could love Israel, but they don't love the state of Israel. They don't think there should be a state of Israel. And our Hasidic friends from the Satmar movement would feel very strongly that way. I don't question their love for the land of Israel. And I don't question their hatred for the concept of Zionism, because both are patently true. They have love for the land and they have hate for the state. I can disagree with them, but fine, but the feeling is the feeling. So there's that.
Right.
Now, as I said earlier, do I think there's a difference between you and what you do for the land of Israel and what I do for the land of Israel? Yes, I think you put your money a lot more where your mouth is. I think you're much more heavily invested than I am. I think you should, there's no question. There's no question. Every time you go to a coffee house, there's a shomer right outside. You pay that price every single day when you go to the movie theater, and I don't. So what I'm not going to acknowledge the fact that you're pulling much more of the weight than I am. It's a fact. Now, if I'm outside and I'm working shlichut for the land, but I'm outside the land and I'm okay, then you can make the argument that that's the same. In fact, I think it's simple that that's the same. But you, Uri Pilichowski, and me, Shlomo Sprung, which of us does more for the land of Israel? I think it's you by a mile.
Okay. And so what is doing for the land of Israel? What does that really have to do in terms of its qualifications for Zionism or loving Israel?
I don't think it has. It's not a question of qualifications. Your feelings are your feelings. Your beliefs are your beliefs. Now, if you want to put it on a spreadsheet and say, okay, but how much do you do to help the cause? Well, not everybody helps the cause, and not everyone who helps the same. So a person that lives there and has to stand through those Farkakta Ben Gurion checkpoints and pay those awful usurious taxes and deal with those horrific political realities, and you're a tzaddik.
Right. It's very funny because I hear this a lot, right? I hear this especially from Americans, and I hear it from a lot of Israelis as well. The idea, you use the term before, the Hebrew term Mesiras Nefesh, the sacrifice.
Yeah.
So there are certain things that are for sure sending our kids to the army, right? Well, by the way, just to be, I've never sent a kid to the army. My daughter, I have daughters that are all over 18, and they've all chosen national service, which is looked upon as same thing, right? And so I'm not worried about my daughter's life. So it's not the same thing. It's the same thing in terms of, yes, for my daughter's sake, she is giving, or 3 daughters now have given up of a year to 2 years of their lives for the country.
But, 100%, beautiful.
But their lives are never at risk doing so. There is a difference in terms of just within the category of sacrifice. But it's funny because I think that it's something that I'd like to dispel. I think Americans look at the process of living in Israel as a sacrifice. Like am I gonna make that sacrifice? Am I gonna do that and like give up? Like I have to, like, just be honest. And I know that I'm rare in this sense, but not so rare. My lifestyle is 100 times better. I'm not talking about
better, much better.
Right, I'm saying right, much better. Like that's just to take up a little too much time with the microphone here. But when I lived in America, especially when I lived in Beverly Hills, Beverly Hills is a pretty big place. The houses are pretty nice and pretty big.
It's actually a really small place with big houses.
Right, so right, it's true. Right, so but when I lived there, so like one of the things that my wife and I were very emphatic about the fact that we're moving back. In fact, my contracts all said that when a job opportunity presents itself in Israel, I'm allowed to break my contracts in America because we were so emphatic on this is temporary. And what we were terrified of was when we went back, we left Israel in Polo. So we had a very, very, very small apartment, and we didn't see our livelihood prospects getting much better as we got older. So we assumed that we would go back to Israel and live in a very, very tiny apartment. So in America, we kept all 6 of our children in one bedroom. Like my wife hated it, but I used to call it the bunker, and it was 3 bunk beds, pressed up against the walls with very little room in the middle, and the idea being that we're going to have to sacrifice when we go back. Right. And then, but like my house here, and you've been here, is much nicer.
Huge.
Anything I could have afforded. And my lifestyle, I drive a nicer car than I did in America. This year I'm making more money than I did when I lived in America. Right. So thank God. Now again, a lot of people don't have that experience, but a lot of people do. A lot of people's lives get much better. And especially free healthcare. There's no day school tuition here. My day school tuition, I would say it out loud, but like I'm scared that I'd lose 1,000 followers just out of pure spite. My day school tuition is it's for $1,000 a year per kid. And that's because I send my kids to a private school. I could send my kids to a religious public school and it wouldn't cost me. Right. So and that's religious and it's quality Jewish education. So that's like the idea of sacrificing it. I want to nothing to do with our earlier discussion. But like there's really it's not a sacrifice to move to Israel. Like again, yes, the tax rate is high, but you're just trading in your payments to your private insurance company versus to the government, right? That's all you're doing. Sending your kids to the army is tough, but you're living off the hog of the land in America without really giving anything to America. So like maybe that's part of national responsibility anyway of whatever nation you are. So maybe you should be sending your kids to the American army if you live in America. Like just because you're playing your part. Obviously, no one's going to do that, but maybe you should. Maybe we should reinstitute the draft or some form of national service. Because you're just taking instead of giving. But that also giving your kids to the army is also putting your kids into the system of the country, and that's teaching them a value that you can't just
beautiful thing.
Right.
It's a beautiful thing.
So on the one hand, it's a sacrifice, and some people it's the ultimate sacrifice. That's and some parents, a lot of parents, over 25,000 parents have made that ultimate sacrifice, and they didn't get their children back from the army. Excuse me. So, but I'm sorry. But it's not. But moving here and living here is not a sacrifice. That's sorry.
Or it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be.
Right. It doesn't. It's not right. It's not by necessity a sacrifice. It is a. It is. It's a blessing, like you said before.
It's a blessing, and there's also a big difference between living there now and living there in 1982. Like Israel has come a very, very long way from what it was.
Right. 100%. I work at Nefesh now, and the go back.
Oh, that's official.
Oh no, right. I wasn't supposed to say that on Facebook. Right, sorry. I forgot. I know we're just talking together. Edit that out. By now, no one's watching. 36 minutes in. Right. So anyway, I have friends at Nefesh, and they just told me an interesting stat. They said that in the 1980s, 60% of people that moved to Israel from America went back. 60%. That's like a huge fail rate. That's when like it took you 8 months to get a telephone in your house. Like you were online at Bezek and you just waited. So like you had to go to the post office to call your family. And it cost you an arm and a leg, which you couldn't afford. But then now it's less than 10%.
Yeah, I would have thought that.
Yeah,
I would never have guessed as high as 60, but I would have guessed the same kind of thing. Yeah.
Right. So that's, and like you can go to the you can go to the supermarket and you can get like this is a constant discussion that Americans have. Like most American products that we miss are now available here. Not everything. When I was back in Miami, I went to Costco and I was just like astounded by what was there. But then when I was in Miami, I couldn't get a good shawarma.
Right. That's true.
You know what I'm saying? Like, right. And marzipan rugelach I had to bring with me. Like I couldn't.
You didn't share any of those marzipan rugelach, Billy.
So first of all,
talk about this.
I didn't eat it myself. I shared it with everybody.
Not everybody.
On the field, but you had left already.
So you shared it after I left.
I shared it after you left.
That's what I meant by not everybody.
Rabbi
everybody except one person.
Rabbi Gans had plenty for you. He was Yotzei you. I think he had an entire box. If I'm not mistaken, I think I saw him sitting there eating an entire thing of one of those plastic
delicious, gooey, delicious.
So like if I, so you can't get all your American products, but you can't get all your Israeli products in America. You know what I'm saying? It's like it's culture. That's what I'd say. Okay, so let's wrap it up here. I think this is a great discussion.
Yeah, it's time.
That was a very, very good discussion. Hopefully, Billy Neder will be back on next week, Hanukkah edition.
Oh, nice.
And think of something Hanukkah related.
Talk about the Greeks.
All right, brother.
It's great to see
the Greek Miss Universe. Miss Universe we thought the Miss Universe competition is in Israel this year, and there was a lot of and Tammy Waldenberg is producing it.
Really?
Yeah, and Elon.
I had no idea about any of those things that you said, but interesting.
Right. So well, you're not as big of a Miss Universe fan as I am.
Apparently not.
I watched Miss Universe solely to see who the next president of the United States is going to be. And evidently it might be Tammy Waldenberg, but there's a lot of pressure on many of the Miss Universe ladies to not participate because it was in Israel. The only one, like the South African Miss Universe, South Africa pulled their sponsorship from her, and she had to pay all her expenses herself for it. And she stood up to the pressure. But this Miss Universe contestant, the only one to pull out, Greece.
I'm happy to hear that. I'm glad she isn't there. And also, I would say that it would be lovely to get perhaps to a society where we don't have contests like Miss Universe, because I have daughters and I find it appalling.
They have I don't know. I was gonna say they have a talent. I don't know what they do. I've never watched it. I have never watched Miss Universe. I have no idea what goes on there. I assume it's not.
I think you have some idea.
Right, some idea, but I'm saying I have no idea what really. I have to imagine.
We learned this from Achashverosh. This isn't new.
I have to imagine it is not the same as it was when Donald Trump was running. I have to imagine that we've evolved somewhat as a society to something better. But that's my assumption. I don't know if it's true. But in any case, but you should just know, to clear the record, and this will stop. The Greeks are actually very close with Israel. And so it wasn't the Greek country as opposed to South Africa, it was the Greek government.
Right. It was her.
The Greek government is very, very, very pro-Israel, big allies with Israel. There's a caucus that Congressman Deutsch runs, which is in Greece, Israel caucus in Washington, D.C. So that's, they're very good friends of Israel, unlike the Yevonim of the past and Miss Universe.
Yeah. Much love to
Okay, Rabbi. Happy Thanksgiving and a happy
Yes. Gobble, gobble. Peace and love.
Okay.